So as we've been on this journey, one of the gifts that through Ignatian spirituality has given me is the time to take and reflect on the journey you've been on to help you um, do a little bit of a takeaway. And so, want to just invite you to reflect on the journey that we've just been on, the conversations we've been having over the last uh, few days, several hours together, and just take note of the things that are kind of have been resonating with you, the things that have been um, pondering in your head, stirring in your heart, as we reflect on some of the journey that we've had together.
He walks the shepherd,
walks beside me,
ringing out the bell, fading to single. You barely, he walks beside me, in another bella,
fading to see no
is that chance imagine, angel. Reverend walks beside me.
I won't walk alone.
He walks beside me.
He walks beside me.
Through the darkest valley.
He will guide
me
home. Oh, guide me home.
He spreads a table for me where my enemies see. Anoints my head with mercy. Sets my spirit free. Though troubles come to test me, I will fear no harm. The shepherd holds me steady in his loving arms. Hey, he restores what I've been missing, makes my pathway straight for the glory of his goodness, not because I'm great. Every step I take, I feel I'm walking near. Rod and staff, they comfort me. He conquers every fear. Surely goodness follows me.
All of my days,
All my days,
all my days,
all my days,
all my days.
and his mercy covers me.
In countless ways,
Countless ways,
we give him praise.
we give him praise. I will dwell within his house
Forevermore,
forevermore.
forevermore.
We will adore. Oh, yeah. Green pastures spread before me, still waters flow so calm. My cup is overflowing with his healing balm. Though I walk through death's own shadow, I will live my song, because a shepherd promised me I'm safe and I belong. Oh, he walks beside me through the valley deep.
Through the valley, yes, he keeps,
He restores my soul when I can barely breathe.
restores my soul, I believe.
Goodness and mercy all the days I live.
All my days,
All he gives.
I will dwell in his house as long
beside me every day.
through the valley,
Through the storm, he's the way. When I couldn't see the path, he was there. Singleism did it all.
It really has been an incredible journey that we've been on together, and we want to invite you to take a moment to think about what you are taking away. We're not done yet, but this will be interesting as we kind of begin to think about what do we take and carry with us in this next stage of the journey. And so, um, again, want to invite you to log into the Menti. Um, and what are you taking away with you? What are you holding, carrying with you from this conference into the next season of life ministry in your parish, in your ministry, however that looks? Just we'll allow a few moments for that to happen. If you're tech savvy, the QR code on the screen will help get you there. And if you're a Luddite like myself, feel free to put your response in the chat. That'll be great too. Lisa, what are you thinking? I mean, I realize we've had a little bit of a, um, advanced seat being part of the planning, but what are you taking away from this as we think about the next season of life and ministry?
Well, I think has been reiterated a number of times today throughout our session is around that intentional listening and how critical and really key. That's just not a step we can skip.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do jump as Emily was showing that wonderful kind of model for discerning how we can be more missional. The loving service and the listening are really key. So, and all the ways that we do that, yeah. How about you, Shawn? What have you been thinking about? And by the way, Shawn and I are both directors of mission and ministry. He's in the Diocese of Fredericton. I'm in the Diocese of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. So you've got kind of the East Coast segment here. But Shawn, what are you thinking about as you've reflected on the 2 days?
Yeah, I mean, similar to you, and I think a lot of us, it's that I'm seeing these comments of I'm not in this alone, and you know so often in the type of ministries we're in, it can feel isolating. You can feel like you're talking in a silo that others aren't getting it, or you're all of a sudden speaking at Bethel and speaking a different language that no one understands. And so one, for me, it's an encouragement of, there are siblings across the country that are in similar situations and wrestling similar things. And again, as someone who has the privilege of being someone to encourage people to take a risk, admittedly, a number of people think sometimes I'm encouraging them to take a risk to get into trouble, but those who know me know I'll have your back too. When you do take that risk. And so, it's a reminder of, and I'm sitting here, been wrestling with, what is it in my own ministry, in my own rhythms, serving in the diocese, serving alongside the bishop. What are some things that I need to start getting a little more risky on? So a little bit of a fair warning to those from the diocese who are on. But some great comments in the chat as well. The other thing that it's striking me, like, and I don't know about you, Lisa, or others, feel free to kind of interject in the chat if you disagree. But I think we're finally admitting the state that we're in. I think for a long time we've been talking about we have to do church differently, we have to think differently, yada, 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 yada. But I think we're finally actually admitting that and recognizing we don't know what the next step is. And I think
I
that's,
agree.
yeah,
Yeah, I think many of us have named that. I think it may have been painful, certainly for some, for a real while. In many parts of our diocese, I think in some ways we've moved beyond the lament. And as Bishop Sandra had said during the night of the bishops' panel, I think some of our folks have said, okay, well, if this is our new reality, they roll up their sleeves and they're like, well, what's worth drawing? I mean, really, what have we got to lose in some ways? So for some folks, I think they have moved beyond the naming, the disrupting sometimes of some of the patterns and some of the practices. Or just we've always done it that way. That can be a little bit harder, especially for folks who still might be a little stuck in the imminent cultural paradigm, as we talked about, in that where we have been stuck. But I think many folks have moved beyond that and said, okay, now what?
yeah. And that now what can be both encouraging, liberating, and like causing you to like scream into your pillow at night. Or
Yeah,
however it is that you process that fear, right? Because for many of us who have been formed for ministry, and certainly much of the formation that's happening for people in ministry is in a particular context, in a particular almost institutional silo. And don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not attacking. It's just a reality. We're forming people sometimes for a church that doesn't exist anymore. And part of that new learning, unlearning, relearning, whatever adjective you want to put in front of learning, we need to do that learning. And I think that's where the listening to what learning how to listen and cultivate that relationship with the spirit to be able to hear what's going on. I remember once in a sermon illustration, trying to talk about like learning how to listen to what the spirit is doing is like learning how to hear and discern the language of an infant. Like you often see, and fair warning, I'm not a parent, so I'm talking from the space of observation. But you see these parents who get because they're in such deep relationship with their child, it sounds like a babble to the world around, but to the parent, they know exactly what they're saying. They know they've cultivated that relationship. And I think part of the discipleship, as we've talked about, is learning that language, learning how to listen, learning how to talk, I think.
yeah, if I might share an example from one of our very rural congregations where they have a part-time priest in charge, so not a permanent priest who actually lives in their neighborhood, but they said, what are we going to do? So they started to listen to their neighborhood. They're on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia, again, a very rural area. The number one employer is the fishing industry. So either you work at the fish plant, or you're supporting, or you're a trucker for the fish plant, or you're a fisher person. And so they began to listen to their neighborhood and say, wow, this is really important. So they did a blessing of the fleet in a couple of places, which is quite common. But then they began, the priest in particular, and a couple of folks would go down and talk to people who were at the fish plant and listen to what are they saying? What are their concerns? And one of the things is around the coastal care, the ecology of how they take care of the waters and how they fish and how others take care of the waters. So, in a roundabout way, they got in contact with Dalhousie University, and now they have an ecology project that has been funded and supported with this really neat partnership with Dalhousie University for citizen scientists to be monitoring and collecting data to see how they're caring for their coastline. And they have workshops. The
Mm.
church hosts workshops along with the community. They're continuing to listen into that, and the community they've commented, they've said, the church really cares about what's happening with our fishing fleet and how we sustain this. And they said, yes. So they've really been working hard to build those relationships with uh, people where the fishing industry is so incredibly important. Yeah, so they don't, it's not a big budget. They've learned a partnership. They've learned to do that listening, and they're continuing to do that as they move forward in the citizen scientist ecology project.
I'm glad you shared that, Lisa, because I think often we think it's got to be a big, elaborate, flashy signs, big building. But, here's something very simple that works in that context, in that situation. And I think that's important for us to hold on to is, there's things for us to learn from neighboring parishes, neighboring communities, neighboring churches. But part of that gift of listening is actually saying, Lord, what is it that you're doing here? Like I can look at what, Ian and Emily are doing in Niagara. I can look at what you're doing, Lisa, and say, oh, I wish this, I wish that, I wish, but Fredericton, the Diocese of Fredericton is not Niagara. We don't have communities that are like Niagara. God's shown special favor to, the East Coast that, he hasn't shown to Central Canada. I kid to all those who live in Central Canada. Um, Send letters to Lisa. Um, but the reality is, it's what are the principles that I can learn from, but what's actually the Spirit doing here? I remember, Lisa, you've probably heard me tell this story before, and but it's, I was working with a small rural parish where their main kind of their core body would be about 20 individuals. Um, and most of them are in or retirement. And they had me down a couple of years ago to do like some missional conversation, and when you look at the neighborhood that surrounds them, the parish, as we heard Archbishop David talk about the cure of souls in the parish on Thursday night, they're now what was a farming community, and this little parish on the side of a salmon river is now predominantly industry. So I said to them, "What's God doing in your neighborhood?" And they looked at me and said, "Well, it's all businesses. What are you talking about?" So one of the things I challenged them, I said, "Well, let's pray about this before I come back. And why don't you start talking to your neighbors?" Now, full disclosure, I was expecting by the time I got back to say, "Thanks for coming. Uh, let's lift that next booking weekend." And when I came back, we talked about how do you be a blessing to the businesses that are surrounding you?
Hmm.
And so often we hear these stories of us going to businesses saying, "Hey, could you help us with our bake sale? Could you help us put a new roof on? Could you help us with our steeple?"
Yeah.
I don't know if any of these are hitting home for people, but it's often we go with our hands out of, "Can you give?" They went with their hands out to say, "How can we serve?" And so now all of those businesses, and I was just checking because I'm on the parish's email list, and every week there's three or four businesses on the prayer cycle for the week, and that parish continues to pray for them and reaches out. How do we pray for you? How do we pray for your employees? How do we pray with what's going on? They've also wonderfully realized you can't look to be a blessing and bring Jesus into the community just for the sake of attendance and offering, because the world around us is clued into that, I think.
I think you raise a really good point around recognizing or seeing with fresh eyes our communities. Um, Stephanie Spellers mentioned about the prayer walking, and in some
Yeah.
I know of our rural communities, it's just not possible to walk from one community to the next. It's too much geography. But even doing prayer caravans, and we've had a couple of parishes doing that, And stopping and praying at City Hall, stopping and praying at the high school. I mean, all the pressures that young people are going through. Stopping and praying at the hospitals and all the staff who are stressed and overworked and trying to do more with less. And it was really powerful for them, not only to be stopping and praying and thinking about what are the needs and what's going on inside some of the facilities and buildings around their neighborhood. But a number of folks, including the city hall, they came out and met them and they shook their hands and they went over the Mi'kmaq Council and they met with Indigenous peoples and had a conversation and said, "We're praying for you and your work." And people were like, "Really?" And it was such an important exercise for them to do this prayer walk and then the prayer caravan. And there's so many ways that we can do that, just to do that deep listening. One of the things I encourage our folks to do is read the posters around your neighborhoods and look at your neighborhood Facebook pages and what are people concerned about? What are they talking about
Yeah.
besides potholes and and but there's some good things happening too, and there may be places where you can join in. And in my neighborhood, pickleball is really hot. Like everyone is just getting on board with pickleball. And I think I should be over hanging out with the pickleball people because Jesus would be there. Like, I mean, that's a really good question is where would Jesus be hanging out in your neighborhood?
Yeah.
And it might be your church. It might be the bingo hall, or the Legion. And then also, I think another good question is what would break Jesus' heart? If Jesus prayer walked your neighborhood, what would he be wrecked by as
Yeah.
he's looking around at the people and the needs and the ways that we can be the hands and feet and heart of Christ in our neighborhoods? So maybe you have some ideas for how you're doing intentional listening in your communities or maybe in your diocese. We'd love to hear from you in the chat if you want to share some of those ways that you're doing that deep listening and maybe beginning to build relationships or doing that loving service. We would love to hear more about that.
And I think too, connected with what you're saying, Lisa, is it's learning how to notice things again. Like when I go into to kind of do prayer walk, kind of direction or instruction, I try to empower people, like get that childhood create curiosity again. Like we heard through a lot of the speakers throughout our conference about having that curiosity, that wonderment. Like, okay, so full disclosure, like since it's just you and I talking, Lisa, um, I love going to the local coffee shops and just grabbing a coffee, bring my laptop, and a good chunk of the time, even though like I'm trying to catch up on emails and proposals and things for this, that, or the other, I'm watching what's going on. I'm taking notice and saying, like, Lord, what's happening in this environment? Who's at like, and every time I enter into that space where I offer to God that time, something invariably always happens. Whether someone comes by and says, "Hey, could I come and have a sit down and chat?" Or I'll see something and wrestle with, okay, well that was an interesting interaction that I saw, or oh, okay, well what's the dynamic that's going on here today in this situation? And as Bishop Sandra just rightly highlighted, holding office hours in local coffee shops.
Yeah,
And
indeed.
and not just for the sake of the part that I would push back on. I find pastors do that easily. Hey, let's go grab a coffee. We'll work on our sermons together, and we become isolated again. We've just moved our silos into another silo. But how do we allow ourselves to be open just to who's there, who's having conversation?
Yeah, yeah. When I was in the parish and preparing sermon, I would go and hang out at the local Starbucks on Friday afternoon. And there was a fellow who was working for Irving Shipbuilding, which is our
Yep.
huge industry here, and it's just booming. And he built all of the storage containers for Irving, and he was just so busy. And we would talk and talk, and every time we talked together. And then I stopped and changed jobs and didn't return to Starbucks, but ran into him in the grocery store, and he grabbed me and hugged me and how you doing? And I thought, wow, there's a friendship that we had forged. And there were other familiar faces at Starbucks too, and even just listening. And it's probably not a good thing to eavesdrop, but I like to listen when I'm standing in the lineup at the pharmacy. What are people, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
Is it the lack of doctors in our neighborhoods? Is it, maybe it's mental health challenges, and perhaps there's an opportunity for us as church to hold safe space for folks who might need, yeah, a bit of support and that kind of thing. So doing that listening in all kinds of ways. What's on people's hearts? Like, what do they need? And where would Jesus be?
Yeah. And the other thing that strikes me, even, connected to all this of learning how to listen, and um, many of us we've become conditioned to just be like, I'm going somewhere for a purpose. I'm walking down the street to get from A to B, or we're not even walking anymore. It's, just getting in the car to go from A to B. We've got headphones in. We're responding to texts or whatever. I mean, I, the vast majority of my communication is often through my thumbs on a tiny little screen, where I would love, like, if you really want to connect with me, pick up the phone and let's have a voice conversation, if not a face-to-face conversation. Because, like, I actually want to hear, the tone. I want to hear what's going on behind you.
Yeah.
As Danny's pointing out, he doesn't drive. He benefits a lot from like those walking conversation. But it's also taking the time to say, Lord, help me hear what you want me to hear today.
Hmm.
Like sometimes I'll be working with the congregation and I'll just ask them, what are you hearing in your community? And usually I get this look of like, what are you talking about? That, like, how often, I remember working with a congregation that was thinking of how do we be a blessing to the neighborhood we're in, doing a prayer walk through it. And it was a really industrial, impoverished neighborhood. And you know what we didn't hear? Dryer vents.
Right.
We didn't hear dryer vents. Now, this was a heavily compact, dense area. And I asked the question, I said, all of these people, we're walking around supper time, so people, early evening, people would be home. Why? And we just kind of posed the question, why aren't we hearing dryer vents as we're walking by buildings? Well, we did some investigation and found out these were all rooming houses. They didn't have dryers in them. So, and most of those people couldn't afford to go to the laundromat.
Right.
So what were they doing? They were wearing the clothes that were on their back for as long as they physically could, and stand the dirt, the odor, and then they would go to the local, clothing depot and get a new outfit or wardrobe for the next month. But that doesn't bring humanity to anyone. That doesn't bring any dignity to anyone. So what do? The church looked and said, how do we create that? How do we respond to that? That just came from noticing and listening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we think, again, because we can only do things on big scale. Um, right around the corner there, I live in an urban center, in an urban city. Right around the corner, this lady in her 70s started the church's food bank on Tuesdays because she had a burden for the growing population of people on or near the street in this neighborhood. And so her in her 70s, she has a bunch of fresh baked loaves of bread that she has ready for Tuesday morning. And loads of people now are making sure that that cupboard is stocked so that she can then be but that was one person having a vision. That
Yeah.
was one person's heart breaking for the people around her.
Robert Pittman gives a great example here. He says, when I was in inner city parish, I used to pull a garden cart with a cooler full of water and walk through the neighborhood praying for the
Yeah.
community. handing out water and just chatting with people during the summer months so I could meet people and learn their stories. Yeah, or hand out popsicles to the kids or Mr. Freezy's.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a gal here in Halifax who's at the cathedral. And she rolled out, we have a huge labyrinth kind of mat in Victoria Park, which is in the center of the city. Beautiful big park, right near the hospital. Lots of university students around, a lot of traffic in going to the shopping area. And she's really painfully shy, but she just really loves to teach people prayers. So she had these sheets and was engaging with people in conversation about praying a labyrinth. And yeah, and just talking to them about what's going on in their life. This was during COVID, so it was easier to do those kinds of conversations outside. But she thought, it's a great spot to have conversation, but also to teach some prayer. But to be listening and watching what the needs might be in those neighborhoods.
Mm.
I'm wondering, Shawn, if we can talk a little bit about, as Susan Bell started us off with, and I think it's been something that's resonated throughout the conference, is around our conversation about scarcity and abundance.
Yeah, yeah.
And especially, when you're sitting at a church council meeting, and sometimes there is a lot of conversation about scarcity, and it can really sink our hearts because it can just go so negative, and it won't happen here. And I wonder if you've had any experience around having that conversation about abundance instead of scarcity, and vice versa, and others too. If you could share in the chat, we'd love to hear how you've been able to disrupt or interrupt um, that conversation about scarcity and helping folks to see the abundance, the generosity of God. And I love just Bishop Sandra had talked about, even changing the agenda on a church council meeting, that we don't start with money and buildings, that we actually start talking about ministry first and what we're
Yeah.
doing or where God has showed up this week in some way, even personally. But what about you, Shawn? What are you hearing about scarcity and abundance in the Diocese of Fredericton?
Well, I mean, probably similar to all of us. Like, if there's no money, then obviously God has no intention to do anything good. So just, pack it in and sit back. I kid. Um, no, I mean, I think I think because we've caught ourselves up in a culture where we look at the other church, we look at the other parish, we look at the other denomination and see how, they might have big flashy stuff and say, well, there's no way we can do anything. You know, how many conversations have we all been at to say, well, that's a good idea, but there's no money. Like I'm reminded time and time again of that verse that says, you have not because you ask not. We don't have because we don't ask for. Ed reminded us Thursday night, there actually is loads of money out there. There's loads of money out available in our community. I mean, I'm a colleague and I are working on a resource for churches that helps identify where these resources are that money just goes sit unused because there are things that are out there.
Mm.
The other part connected to kind of scarcity over abundance is I think part of that is we forget that so many times the Spirit does powerful things with very little. Like look at Jesus's,
Mustard seed.
yeah, I mean, how many times did Jesus approach someone one on one and literally transform their lives? It wasn't, he wasn't there to, it wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic. Um, Many times, I mean, we have examples of that, but a lot of the most powerful, um, personally impacting stories happened one on one.
Yeah.
And so when we take that pressure off to say, Lord, what is it that you're inviting me into? What is it you're inviting my parish into? Again, I mentioned, the pantry around the corner. That started with one woman and a vision she had.
Yeah.
Um, Time and time again, it's reframing how we do things and not worrying about what are the what are the things that we can't control? Um, and again, it keeps coming back to being willing to take those steps, to take that risk. And what's interesting is I think um, the conversations I have one-on-one with our clergy and our leaders, the vast majority of them want to take a risk. But as leaders, there is also fear because I've never met a leader who wants to see the organization crumble under them. And so there's that fear that if I take the step, it's going to crumble while I'm in leadership.
Yeah.
And yet, there's a greater opportunity that something beautiful is going to blossom if we take that step. We actually have a number of vestries in our diocese that the financial statement comes at the end of the meeting. And sometimes that's is everything balanced? The bills are paid? Okay, good. And that's what's left. Because they've spent time talking about the mission, what are the needs, what are the good things that God is doing, and it shifts what your motivation becomes and where your focus goes.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've heard folks say is, with the Moses story about when God says, what do you have in your hand? And Moses has the
Yeah,
staff. And so, how many times we might not have a lot of money in the bank. We may not have a whole whack of people. But what do we have? We have a little parish. It's in a very, very rural area of Nova Scotia. It's in New Germany. It's not a town, it's in a village. They don't have a lot. They don't have a permanent priest. Um, they don't have a lot of money in the bank, but they've looked around and they said, what does our community need? And at that time, they didn't have a coffee shop anywhere. There was no real place to gather during the day and just hang out. And well, they had a hall, so they said, well, we have a coffee pot, and we could bake some things. And so they just kind of opened it up weekly on Wednesday morning, and they call it Community Cafe. And they've been going now, I think it's 5 or 7 years.
mm,
And they have 70, that's 70 people showing up weekly in the middle of nowhere, to be honest. And it's mainly all folks who've moved there who bought hobby farms. This is Christmas tree country. It's very rural, but they love to gather and they've really recognized the value of community. And so they've done a food cupboard. They support some feeding programs at the local school. They collect money for their fair trade coffee, but what's left over, they support families at Christmas time. They've really looked at the families who've been coming to the community cafe. And there was one couple who were about to have a baby, and their family was a long ways away. They did not live nearby. And they said, well, we should throw you uh, a baby shower. So they
yeah,
did. And like everybody showed up in the whole community. And they thought, wow, what a church, like you do this kind of stuff. Like, yeah, we do. And so they had a couple of ukuleles and they started just kind of gathering people. There was someone played guitar and a snare drum, and they had like a dozen ukulele players, and they had this really neat ukulele group. Again, it was in a very rural area, but they just said, what do we have? Like, how do we do this? And just a couple of years ago, they spun off from that weekly gathering, community cafe, a cafe church. And now that is growing even more than their Sunday morning regular kind of worship service because people are more relaxed. There's a dialogue sermon, there's these ukuleles, there's food. They've just been able to just kind of build those relationships, and they've become a place where people know if they need help with something, they go and knock on the door and say, "Can the church help?" So they've just said, "What have we got?" So I think that's a big thing. I often think, God wouldn't ask us to do ministry and not provide. I mean, God is generous. God isn't cruel or cheap or stingy. God says, I've called you to care for these souls in your community. I've given you things. It may not be a lot of money, but I've given you things. I've given you a heart, hands, mouths. How can you serve them and love them and be this for Christ? And I think, yeah, when, and I've seen just people get so excited about that too. And then they tell the story. And I've been telling the story. That's part of my job in the diocese, is to keep sharing those stories all over the place. But you can do that too in your parishes and in your regions, to say, I've heard this really neat story. Like God really is at work. God really is showing us how we can serve our neighbors in a missional way.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lisa. And like, I think as we started, at the beginning talking about what we're taking away, I think I'd encourage all of us to, don't let Thursday night and today just be another church conference that you went to
Yeah,
and hung out with
yeah,
some amazing people, which we've done. Um, but make sure we take some time to think about, you know, what is it that God's inviting us personally? Like my plan, the rest of the weekend. Shawn, what is it that the Spirit's inviting me to in this new season, in this next phase? Um, and I think one of the common threads that I've heard throughout this is that, reminder that love has to be at the forefront. Convincing people of their need of Jesus, that hasn't got us anywhere unless we model that with love. If we don't start and operate from a place of love and blessing, the people outside the church, who are not with us, who have never been exposed to church, they can see when we're just looking, to fill a pew or get money on the offering plate. Do we have a
yeah.
genuine desire to be in community with these people, with our neighbors? Um, so I think there's an opportunity for us all as we kind of think about that and in this next season of life, and continue cultivating these relationships where we can support one another and help lift one another up when we're struggling. So yeah, it's important to do that. And thanks for that reminder, Lisa. And it's good for us to hold. If you know someone, invite them to hold you accountable on that. This has been good, and I know Dave's getting ready to come in and join us, and that will be great. It's been it's been good, and there's a lot that I think the Spirit's doing in and through us.
Shawn, I was sharing with you yesterday how inspired I was by Jasmine and Terrence's story in St. John, New Brunswick, about Stone Church and their economic model. And I know that's one of our struggles, is our economic model in parishes seems to be broken. Our offerings are not covering like they used to, and giving patterns are different. And that's not about blame. It's about just it's the way lifestyles are, and heavy student loans and all those kinds of things, even for young folks. But as Ed had indicated, and Jasmine and Terrence, about finding folks who want to give. And I'm sure they're really good storytellers, as they were so captivating telling their story to us on Thursday night, about finding folks who will write a check and support your ministries. And I'm a firm believer that money follows vision.
Mm.
And when we're doing something, it's making a difference. People write checks. We have a small group in North Sydney. If you've ever been to North Sydney, you've taken the ferry over to Newfoundland. This is where our church is, St. John the Baptist, and they started the Feed the Need a few years ago. I'm giving out free meals once a month. They've now broadened the Anglicans, and they've involved. I think it's the Seventh Day Adventists and the United Church. They're all taking turns. I think there's a meal every week now. And a few years in, somebody noticed what they were doing and saying, hey, this is really making a difference for folks in terms of helping them with good, healthy meals, but also connecting with community, and wrote a check for $1,000 to support them. And they've said, we've had more than we needed to do this ministry. And we thought when we started, like, we're not going to be able to keep doing this because we can't afford to keep buying food and all the packaging and that kind of thing. And it was just, I think they were just faithful. They just, well, we'll give it a try. And then, people began to support them and write checks and say this is an important ministry to our neighborhood. And so I think, yeah, sometimes it's taking that risk and saying, God, well, if you're really calling us to this, then you'll provide, and we're going to take a chance and try it, at least in this way, or maybe it has to be adapted or adjusted. But I think, yeah, looking at those new economic models, who can we partner with? How might we share our building with someone so that we can really bless them and bless our neighborhood, but also perhaps be able to share some of those expenses. Since we're only maybe using it a couple of hours a week, we could be really good stewards of our buildings and our properties.
Mm. Good thoughts.